it's not true at all when he says that the diversity visa program is not giving the US the best. It's not that these countries are not sending their best, because actually the program is doing an excellent job in getting the elites of all these poor countries.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Getting Woke with Dr. Chi. Today I have a very special guest, Onoso Imoagene, a dear friend, who is an associate professor of sociology at NYU Abu Dhabi. She is the author of Beyond Expectations, Second Generation Nigerians in the USA and Britain, and she does a lot of research on African immigrants, both in the United States, in Nigeria, in Great Britain, around the world. This woman is just like always on the move. So I thought that she would have some really interesting things to share with us about her research and her life doing this type of work. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
I'm excited too. So now, where are you right now? I feel like every time I talk to you, you're like in a different place.
I'm actually in Katy, Texas. So okay. I'm in the US right now. So but I spent, the session in NYU Abu Dhabi, in Abu Dhabi. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of flexibility. So you can sometimes come up, you can, stay back. So it's really a good spot to be in.
How many countries have you lived in, Onoso?
Not many. I was born in Nigeria. I moved to the United States. I studied for a year in England, came back to the US, and now, I'm in Abu Dhabi. So how many is that? Is that 4? I think just 4.
Only 4. Okay. I feel like most of us don't leave the 5-mile radius of where we're born, or where we grew up at least. And you've been zipping all over the place.
Well, the time that I'm an immigrant, so I've already moved. So I find I'm very adaptable. It's not a problem to imagine moving somewhere else. It's just, yeah.
Interesting. I never thought about things that way, because I know that in the scholarly literature, they talk about how we shouldn't use the term immigrants, we should use the term migrants, because people are not often just migrating to one place, that they're sometimes moving to different places. And I'm always struck when I encounter people who are like, oh yeah, I live in the United States now, but I lived in China, I lived in Australia, and now I'm here. And they're like, I'm here for now. I don't know where I'll go in the future. And it's always like, oh yeah, I guess there are people who live.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of work coming out in immigration right now, where people are raising those questions, right? That immigration doesn't necessarily mean permanence once you move to one spot, that people are constantly moving. There's this sense of impermanence for some, it's temporary. So there's a lot of work coming out about multinational migration, different kinds of ways in which people are formulating it now. Mm-hmm.
So you're a multinational migrant. Look at you. I had no idea. I've known you for how many years? Okay. Well, so moving on a little bit. So your first book, Beyond Expectations, I feel like I read your book multiple times. I've taught your book, and I'm sure you've given lots of talks and entertained people asking all sorts of questions about your first book about Nigerians who are born in the United States or born in the UK. We refer to them as sociologists as second generation immigrants, although a lot of people in the United States refer to them as first generation Americans because they're born and raised in America, right? So was there anything, how would you give somebody the 4th floor elevator spiel of your first book? Oh, you wrote a book about immigration? Wow, that's so cool. What'd you find? And you're going to the 4th floor. What would you tell them?
I'm always really bad about doing that 30-second elevator speech, because I think one of the things with my book was that it was telling so many stories. I think one of the things I would say about my book is that it's the first book-length work on second generation African adults in the United States and in Britain. So, at a point I remember, just to answer.
Ding, 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 4th floor. Sorry, gotta go.
We can't do 30-second elevator speech. I remember when I was coming into Harvard, leaving Cambridge, where I did my master's, and I was asking people, where are Africans in this story? And everybody was like, oh, we have Caribbeans. They're good enough proxy for Africans. And I was like, nope, that's not, for historical and contemporary reasons, that's not a good answer, right? So
That's a little offensive, actually. Just pick your Black people. They're all the same. Whatever.
old, right? So I think, first of all, I would say that, you see, my book, is one of the first that really is talking about the adult African second gen. And one of the things I really wanted to talk about the book was what was happening at the intersection of race and class and ethnicity and immigration, that we had to unpack these things because we really didn't know. So my book does a lot of work talking about how, Black diversity plays out on the ground. Talking in terms of Black on Black relations, let's hear the voices of these Africans in this story, And so one of the things I would say my book does is, it really talks about this, children of a hyper-selected population or community, and asking questions about, the educational advantage of their parents. Does it transmit to the second generation? How well are they doing? In the idea that they want to distinguish themselves from African Americans on the US side and Caribbeans on the UK side. How successful are they in doing this? What's the end point of this identity project or this identity work? So I would just end up saying that, my book talks about the adult African second generation. It spends a lot of time talking about what's going on at the intersection of race and class and ethnicity and their immigration status. And it's also talking about their entrance into the Black middle class or into the middle class and how they're living it and negotiating those questions of identity.
Wow, that's a lot to tackle in one
book.
And so, you're looking at these issues not only just in one book, but in two different societies. What did you think were the most striking differences between the UK and the United States?
Yeah, that was something that really struck me. I had this, my book was interested in identity work, so I had this conversation with Orlando Patterson when it's a book out of my dissertation, and Orlando Patterson, a professor of sociology at Harvard, was sitting on my committee. And one of the things he was saying was that, you really don't want to ask people, how do you identify? You sort of want to back into it so that you don't prime people that way. So I just threw in these questions. What does being American mean to you? What does being British mean to you? Do you see yourself as American? Do you see yourself as British? And it was so striking how differently the two groups responded, as in the second generation in Britain versus the second generation in the US. And so what I found, was very low levels of national identification with Britain among the Nigerian second generation in Britain, right? They were like, I'm Nigerian, I'm African, what does being British mean to you? And it was very instrumental in the way they looked at it. It means having a red passport, being able to travel, having the rights, easier to get jobs. And then you came to the US and I was asking people, what does being American mean to you? And all of them were like, oh, America is the land of freedom. It's the land of opportunities. It can be anything you want to be in America. So there was this strong buy-in into the national myths of what it means to be American. And so that raised up a real paradox, right? It was a puzzle. Because the second generation Nigerians in Britain weren't doing poorly economically. So it wasn't as a result of economic marginalization. That's what's driving it, how the studies were framing North Africans and their children in France, so they were doing well. So what was going on? So that was really the thing that was very striking about the work. It was eye-opening. Mm-hmm.
Wow. I feel like you were telling my story when you were talking about the Americans and their beliefs in the land of the free, home of the brave. I was like, let me get my US flag here and wave it every 4th of July. Yeah, I'm proud to be an American, the whole thing. And I was like, do they have that in the UK? Is there a UK day where everybody's let's be proud to be Brits?
That's the amazing thing because, coming as a sociologist, I started analyzing the work using the multiculturalism frame, where the UK at that time had an official multicultural policy, which is that, we celebrate everybody, all the immigrants and their ethnic backgrounds. And, some work had come out of comparing the US and Canada, saying that countries that had multicultural policies tended to have better integrated immigrants and their children, right? And then the US is basically just hands off. It's a laissez-faire. Everybody just figure out what you're going to do and where you're going to settle. And yet they were having these individuals that were really waving the American flag. And so it was like, well, this is not what multiculturalism as a theory would predict. And so what's going on? So they had this, I had to start thinking in terms of national legacies and the histories of these countries, right? And thinking in terms of the histories they have with Black people. And both countries, the US and UK, have very long histories with Black people, from slavery to segregation to, highly diverse societies with a significant Black population now, But I think one of the looking at someone like Paul Gilroy and some historians, they said one of these unique things, or one of the ways in which Britain is different from the United States, is that Britain didn't carry slaves on the motherland, on British soil in Britain, but they had them in their in their colonies in the Caribbean and where have you. And so Paul Gilroy will argue, that the UK for that reason hasn't really had to confront the issue of slavery and the trauma that has been, linked to that, and so all their policies, even though they have, anti-discrimination policies and what have you, they don't have as much teeth as the ones coming out of the US, because the US is constantly realizing that they have this issue and they keep on having to work to a more perfect union. So they have affirmative action and all of that, and affirmative action, has been pointed out, has become, has allowed Africans, Black immigrants and their children to piggyback on the structures and the opportunities that were given to, African Americans who their grandparents were descendants of slaves in the US. So just talking about that history, talking about so that the United States sort of has a more robust response to these ethno-racial traumas compared to Britain. The fact that the United States has this myth that we're a nation of immigrants, even though we know that, even right now, we are in a period where you can ask, well, there are certain groups that are falling on fault lines, right, where they're not being welcome. But at least that rhetoric is there, right? Whereas in the UK, they see immigration more as an invasion, right? More as in, oh my goodness, we wanted to civilize the masses far away. We don't want you guys to now decide you want to come to the motherland.
Oh, they don't want to civilize us while we're in their neighborhood at the grocery store getting milk. We're not going to civilize us together. Only when we're back home. Okay, I get it.
I remember there's this saying, I read it in Stuart Hall's work and Gilroy, where they said, a lot of white Britons will tell Caribbeans that, go back to your country. We don't want you here. And the Jamaicans and the Caribbeans will be like, we're here because you were there. Mm-hmm. So that's, that whole idea that, well, we're sorry, you've established linkages. But that way of seeing the UK or Great Britain as being exploitative is something that is really powerful in the minds of a lot of the second gen that I interviewed. So all of that, thinking in terms of the legacies of the past, the rhetoric about immigrants, are you inclusive or exclusive, where America seems to be more inclusive in the language, not necessarily, maybe not in really practice for some groups. And then the whole idea of the power of national myths. If you think about it, in school, they make you pledge their allegiance. There's this whole civil religion around what it means to be American. And everybody, I do that exercise with some of my students in some classes where I ask them, because I have a very diverse group, what does being Tanzanian mean to you? What does being Albanian mean to you? What does being American mean to you? The Americans always tell me the same thing: freedom, opportunity, what have you. And the others are trying to scrabble around thinking about what does it mean to be Nigerian, or what does it mean to be Tanzanian, or, yeah. But, Americans they've done a very good job, let's say, of selling these myths. So taking all these things together, that's sort of like the trying to structural arguments. That's one of the things that I think explains these high levels of identification with America, even if they say they're Nigerian, American, or whatever, and the low levels of identification with Britain.
Wow. That was so dope. That was so interesting. You know, as somebody who studied race in Latin America, I've always been comparing the United States to places like Brazil or Mexico, where they have these strong national identities. So much so that historically you couldn't talk about being indigenous or being black or being mixed race. It's like, yeah, we're all Brazilian, you know, we're all Mexican. Let's not talk about those things. So like elites would, use that rhetoric to erase or obfuscate or like to hide in the closet all those nasty, inequalities, racial inequalities, and ethnic inequalities that were, pervasive. But comparing the United States to Great Britain, it's like, oh wow, we have a much stronger national identity. That's so interesting. That allows for immigrants to like feel more part of this imperfect union, if you will.
Right, because I think one of the things they do say when you read the work coming out of Britain is that the British national identity at that time was an identity in crisis, right? So they had a very strong identity when Britain was the empire and they were colonizing and civilizing the masses. And then they had a strong identity during Second World War because they were defeating the Nazis, and that was something that was a rallying cry. But post-Second World War, really, what's the identity? They've been proffering different versions that it's adherence to human rights and English language and, and democracy and those kind of things. And, and at a point in time, it was like, okay, so we're not really in the European Union, but we're not really, so it will be good to see where it settles now after Brexit. But at that time, they had different things they were selling, adherence to human rights and English language that weren't, emotively appealing, to their immigrants and their children. Mm-hmm. They couldn't buy into those things.
We're so proud we speak the English language. Who are like, well, actually, I speak other languages too. Really.
Human rights. Well, every country, many countries that are democratic also believe in human rights. So what else? I think they do have to find there's some work. Britain needs to do some work in actually finding national myths that are appealing.
And that's not just like, like the Queen of England stole stuff from us. And like now we're here because like all of our wealth is here.
You don't want us here. That's the other part. They are being told, look, we don't even want you guys. We want you guys to go back, especially if you're non-white, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Go back home. That's a common thing. Yeah, immigrants have to deal with. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about your new work. So you're like, screw the West. I'm done with you guys. I'm moving to Abu Dhabi. And now I'm doing research on Africans in Africa. So could you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing now? And like, how did you fall into this new research project?
It's not a whole Africans in Africa or screw the West, because my work is looking at immigrants living in the United States who came to the US via the diversity visa lottery program. And I'm talking to their family members and friends back in their home countries, the countries they left, and then also interested in what's happening in those sending countries. So let me say that another way. My work is interested in the downstream effects of US immigration policy using the United States Diversity Visa Lottery Program as a case on immigrants, their families, and the countries they left behind.
What do you mean when you say downstream effects? What does that mean?
Well, that was I have always, first of all, my focus really for, these projects I've been doing and my books has been on African immigrants and their children, but it's something I do believe that as I go on, I have other questions that will broaden that scope, but for now, the focus is on African immigrants and their children. And so one of the things I've always been interested in, or what motivated this study, is when you have these immigration policies coming from rich countries in the global north, how do they intrude? How do they interject themselves in the sending countries? How do they affect the citizens in these countries? And let's start the question, not, the non-migrants and the migrants themselves. So my interest was, what are the intended and unintended consequences of these policies? because I want to trouble that notion or that idea that immigrants are better off because they've come to the global north. That let's probe that further. And let's also think to ourselves about, okay, so these immigration policies are out there and people are using them, but what's the impact, especially transnationally? Do these things have an impact on the immigrants or the potential people before they leave their countries and then, when they arrive? Because, I think looking at a lot of the literature out there, we sort of become inward looking. When we think about the impact of US immigration laws, we tend to look at the impact on the immigrants within the US border once they have arrived. And so my question was, well, let's try and see what happens if we take a look into their countries before they arrive.
Oh, so you're looking at the impact of US immigration policies, specifically this diversity lottery system, on the sending countries, people who are like minding their own business back home.
That's
what I hear an announcement like, hey, there's this diversity lottery visa thing. And like, oh, let me apply for it. Is it that?
That's one aspect. So Mike, when I talk about the downstream effects, I'm looking at the effects of these policies, intended and unintended, transnational in nature, affecting them pre-migration and post-migration. But I'm looking at the effects on the immigrants themselves, on their family members, and then in their sending communities, particularly with the emergence, how these policies create a cottage industry of migration industry actors, how they actually help to get these guys to, these groups of people, these actors to emerge and prosper and monetize the program. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of downstream effects.
Oh, wow. That's fascinating. So what's the most crazy finding that you've had from this research where you're like, I did not expect that?
I think the argument I've sort of settled upon and looking at a lot of the work is developing an idea of structured luck. That when we talk about diversity visa lottery winners, we see them as lucky. If you use the objective definition of lucky, where your chance of winning something is tiny, and your win is sort of outside of your control, that's how we define luck, right? So if we think about your 1 out of 20 million people that applied, put in an application for the visa lottery, and then you were selected, giving you the right to begin to apply for an immigrant visa to come to the US. What are the chances of that happening? So they're seen as lucky, and they see themselves as lucky. And so I am like, okay, so let's ask ourselves what happens after the lucky win, right? And the whole idea in the book is talking about structured luck, that even the people who are allowed to apply for the visa lottery is structured, because the non-educated are not welcome, right? So we are already constructing a worthy and unworthy category of immigrants in terms of who can apply. Then when you now start the application process, you have these visa agents, these entrepreneurs that have emerged, who are further structuring the luck of millions of people in the way they target the young ones who are in university, who are in their final year of secondary school, because those are the ones that will meet the educational requirements. And what that means for these individuals once they arrive in the United States. So I'm really thinking about the process of structured luck, that the entire process is structured, is like luck by design in a sense.
Well, that sounds like a great title, Luck by Design. I just want to throw that out there as a potential title. Very cool. Wow, your work sounds really interesting. So these diversity lotteries, visas, is it only the US that's doing this, or are there other countries that are also doing this? Are there entrepreneurs who are I'm your USA guy, and somebody else is like, no, you want to go to Australia? I'm here for the Outback. How does that work?
You do actually have some educational groups, organizations, businesses in a lot of these countries. I know they are there in Nigeria now. They've become bigger because Nigeria is no longer eligible for the US visa lottery, because we're no longer underrepresented in the US. as defined by the United States, which is that if more than 50,000 citizens of a particular country have become legal permanent residents in the US in the past 5 years, you're no longer regarded as underrepresented. And so you drop out of the visa lottery. Your citizens are no longer eligible to play. So they have a visa lottery program in New Zealand, where citizens of the islands of Tonga can play to come settle in New Zealand. The only difference with the US visa lottery program, is that they give you an opportunity to come to New Zealand for a while to find a job. You must have an offer of employment before you can then actually trigger and get that immigrant visa to settle in New Zealand. So that's the only other one that works strictly as a lottery, where people are pulled and, randomly selected.
Okay. Wow. That's so interesting. I guess I don't think that most of us think about how immigrants arrive here. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in the news about all these people who are undocumented, who are like fleeing, turmoil, whether it's economic or war or what have you, or, gangs that have their origins in the United States, but now we've exported them to Central America. And then they show up at our borders and we're like, so many Americans are like, you stay in your home country, even though we can buy our stuff from everywhere. Anyways, that's a whole other discussion. But there are other types of immigrants that are also coming here. Like, I think we also hear people who are like in the tech industry, like Silicon Valley, like they're doing the H-1B visa system. I don't think we often hear about that diversity lottery system. Why is that? How come we don't hear about that?
Well, I think we hear about it. I mean, Trump helped to publicize it in a very negative way, where he kept on saying, that why do we have a visa lottery system that it's, America is not sharp, America is not, it's not wise, because we're getting the dregs, we're not getting the best. So there was a time where he was actually talking about, and he rails about the diversity visa lottery program. At least he used to rail about it when he was giving his speeches. And there was this event like in November of 2018 where he was like, why do we want people from these shithole countries? It was in the context of talking about the diversity visa lottery program and a comprehensive immigration bill that they were trying to negotiate to pass through Congress, that he's made that statement. Because
I didn't know that. I knew that he was, saying all sorts of horrible things about immigrants, but I didn't know it was specifically in the context of the diversity lottery. Where
the senators are basically saying they wanted to reduce the number of people who win the diversity visa, who are awarded the visa via the program, from 50,000 a year to 25,000, and they wanted to do some shuffling. And so it was like, why do we have all these people from shithole countries coming here? Now, what I would say about that is that it's not true at all when he says that the diversity visa program is not giving the US the best. It's not that these countries are not sending their best, because actually the program is doing an excellent job in getting the elites of all these poor countries. When you look at the national statistics from about the diversity visa lottery, from at least 50% of the sample have at least a bachelor's degree. And everyone there, unless you're an artisan, has to have at least a high school diploma. Now, using the new immigrant survey, I did an analysis of Africans coming in with the DV, and 61% of them have at least a bachelor's degree. So you can actually say that the DV, let's call it another name. Let's call it the highly skilled immigrant program, because it's doing a very good job of getting, when you think about these numbers and compare them to the national averages of these countries, is when you understand how highly selected the population is. So I'll give you an example. In Nigeria, only 7% of Nigerians have at least a bachelor's degree. That's it. And Nigeria stands as one of the most educated sub-Saharan African countries in thinking about it in terms of educational level. Nigeria is the most educated. So if only 7% of Nigerians have at least a bachelor's degree, however you slice it, all of people 25 years and above, and 61.5% of the Nigerians coming through the DV have at least a bachelor's degree. It just shows you that the selection I mean, you can't even describe how highly selected the groups are. And this is supposedly a random
lottery,
but they are doing a fantastic job of getting the most skilled and the relatively privileged in all these countries who have been educated and subsidized by their home countries, if we think about it.
Wow, you're just spilling all the tea today about like these immigration policies and who gets to come here, even with something that's supposed to be like just to serve the purposes of diversity. It's so funny because like I was actually I was on Instagram listening to one of my cousins talk when I was should have been doing work, and she was talking to this guy who lives in the UK, and he's like, yeah, I'm from Nigeria, and I'm like, I live in the UK. I came here for school, and my cousin's like, oh, so tell me about that. Like he was telling her about a program, and somehow they got to talking about the cost of the program. He's like, yeah, it's like £13,000 for, my program. And they're like having confusion around how much that would cost in US dollars. And one of them was like, yeah, I pay $30,000 a year for school. And so I was thinking, wow, sometimes people refer to higher education in the United States as being a Ponzi scheme because you spend so much money to get degrees. And I was thinking to myself that, wow, like I wonder like how much we're all just like, the girls are like, yay, waving their American flags while we're like paying like astronomical, rates or astronomical amounts of money for schooling. Or this guy who's like, he probably is like, I arrived here. I don't have much of an identity with the Brits, whatever. I'm just here to get what I need to get. But he's like paying like half of what we would be as far as an education. I was like, man, I feel kind of like, should I be telling Nigerians like, don't come to America, go to the UK, or like go to Canada? Like, I don't know. But I'm not here to give immigration advice.
I mean, it's not really a clear-cut answer, because I think one of the challenges for a lot of immigrants coming into the US is that they are asked to retrain, right? So even if you come with, so first of all, let's establish a baseline. It's always better to come to these countries in the global north with a college degree. I think you're ahead of the game if you have that compared to if you don't. And the data shows that to be true. Now, when you come, it depends. If you're a medical doctor, that's very easy. You just take the boards, whatever exams. And I think they are,
so easy.
But they have a way to integrate themselves into the medical systems and professions in their new countries. But if you are, you're coming in with you don't have those kind of hard skills. I think people coming in now as IT professionals also have an advantage now in the world we're in, because we're becoming more technologically advanced and there's a huge demand for their services. So if you're coming in as an IT specialist, as one guy told me in my new project, it was like we just plugged the light. It was on in Nigeria, we plugged it and it was on in America. Absolutely.
Wow.
There's no problems in settling and getting a good job, and I tell you, and I had a lot of people who are in IT and they're like, well, we're really enjoying the beauty, the wonderfulness of America, 6-figure jobs, database security, and all those kind of different things. But if you're not in that area where your skills are easily transferable, you tend to be in a bit of a bind, where they basically are now telling you have to retrain. And nursing, nursing, everybody now moves into nursing, and the journey is long and expensive. So I think, it's not very clear-cut.
Got you. Oh, thank you so much for sharing your insights about immigration. This has been really helpful. And thanks so much for joining us on Getting Woke.
Yeah, welcome. I really had a lovely time. Thanks, Chi, for inviting me.
Thanks for getting woke with me today. I hope that you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please like and subscribe. Be sure to share this episode with your friends, your lovers, your enemies, your frenemies, and anybody else who you think might be interested. I hope that you have a wonderful week, and take care.